Who would have thought my husband would bring his mistress into our home disguised as a maid? She walked through my front door in a pressed uniform and lowered eyes, pretending to dust the very life I had built. He thought the deception was clever, hiding betrayal behind polished manners and a servant's smile. But what neither of them realized was that I had seen the truth the moment she crossed my threshold, and I was already planning their downfall. Welcome to True Love Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video. Now let's dive back into the story. The Whitmore estate sat on 13 manicured acres just outside the city, a modern glass and stone monument to wealth and discipline. Everything about it was deliberate. The symmetry of the hedges, the quiet gleam of imported marble floors, the art placed not for show but for statement. Catherine Whitmore believed in order, which is why the disruption arrived like a whisper rather than a storm. Adrian mentioned the new maid over breakfast. "I've hired someone," he said casually, not looking up from his tablet. "Full-time. Live-in." Catherine's coffee paused halfway to her lips. "We already have staff." She came highly recommended. "Hard worker. Discreet. Needs the opportunity." He finally looked at her, offering that familiar, charming smile that had once convinced investors to risk millions and convinced her to risk her heart. "She starts today." Catherine studied him for a moment too long. Adrian disliked details unless they served him. Yet here he was, unusually invested in domestic staffing. "How generous of you," she replied smoothly. By noon, Lila arrived. She stepped out of a modest sedan, carrying a single suitcase. She was young, mid-20s at most, with delicate features and striking poise. Her uniform fit too well, tailored rather than standard issue. Her dark hair was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, not a strand misplaced. But it wasn't her beauty that caught Catherine's attention. It was her posture. Not submissive. Measured. When Lila extended her hand, her grip was firm, controlled. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for allowing me into your home." Her voice was soft but carefully modulated, each word placed with intention. Catherine noticed the faintest trace of expensive perfume beneath the sterile scent of fresh linen. "You'll report to Mrs. Hargrove for daily duties," Catherine said calmly. "She manages the household staff." "Yes." No hesitation. No nervous fidgeting. Just composure. Too much composure. From the corner of her eye, Catherine saw Adrian watching from the foyer. Not casually. Not distantly. Attentively. The first few days passed with seamless efficiency. Lila learned the layout of the house with unnatural speed. She memorized schedules. Anticipated needs before being asked. The children warmed to her quickly. She listened carefully, laughed at the right moments, maintained just enough warmth without overstepping. Catherine observed quietly. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in the upstairs study, she saw Adrian cross the hallway, again. He had no reason to be in the East Wing. His office was on the opposite side of the estate. Moments later, she heard soft laughter. Not the polite kind. The intimate kind. Catherine rose and walked silently to the balcony overlooking the lower living room. Lila stood near the grand piano, dusting its polished surface. Adrian leaned against it, far too relaxed for a brief exchange. Their conversation was low, but their body language spoke fluently. He touched her wrist. Briefly, but not accidentally. Lila did not pull away. Instead, she lowered her gaze in a gesture that might have appeared shy to an untrained eye. Yet the corner of her mouth curved almost imperceptibly upward. A silent understanding. Catherine stepped back before they could notice her. Her heartbeat did not race. Her breath did not falter. Instead, something colder settled in. Calculation. That evening at dinner, Adrian was unusually attentive. He poured Catherine's wine himself. Complimented her dress. Asked about her day in a tone polished enough for an audience. The children chatted about school. Lila moved gracefully in the background, serving courses with quiet precision. When she leaned forward to refill Adrian's glass, her fingers brushed his. A flicker. So subtle it would have been missed by anyone not looking for it. Catherine was looking. Their eyes met for half a second too long. Adrian quickly shifted his gaze to his plate. Lila retreated, expression neutral. Catherine smiled pleasantly and continued cutting her salmon. The performance was almost admirable. Later that night, as the house settled into silence, Catherine stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows in her bedroom. The city lights glowed in the distance like scattered embers. Behind her, Adrian scrolled through his phone, screen illuminating his face in the dark. "Do you trust her?" Catherine asked lightly. "Who?" "The new maid." He chuckled. "You're not jealous of the help, are you?" She turned slowly. "Should I be?" He held her gaze, unwavering. "Of course not." The answer came too smoothly. Catherine walked toward him and placed a hand on his shoulder. His muscles tightened almost imperceptibly. "Interesting. You've always had a generous heart," she said softly. He relaxed, mistaking her tone for reassurance. But Catherine's mind was already moving ahead. Patterns. Motives. Risks. Adrian had grown restless in recent months. Distracted. Arrogant in small ways that often preceded larger mistakes. At the company, she had noticed his impatience during meetings, his tendency to delegate critical decisions he once guarded fiercely. Now this. A live-in maid he personally selected. A woman too polished for the role. A husband too attentive for comfort. Catherine did not believe in coincidences. She believed in leverage. As Adrian eventually drifted to sleep, Catherine remained awake, staring into the darkness. If there was deception in her home, she would uncover it. And if there was betrayal, she would not confront it in anger. She would respond in strategy. Because Catherine Whitmore had not helped build an empire by reacting. She built it by waiting. And watching. The shift began with silence. Not the peaceful kind that filled the Whitmore estate at night, but the deliberate, selective kind. Doors closing more softly than necessary. Conversations pausing when footsteps approached. The subtle tightening of air in certain hallways. Catherine noticed everything. Adrian started taking his calls outside. He had always been transparent about business matters, often discussing deals openly at breakfast or in the study with the doors wide open. Now, he stepped onto the terrace, lowering his voice, turning slightly away as though shielding words from the wind. One evening, Catherine passed through the foyer just as Lila emerged from the west corridor. The west corridor led nowhere relevant to household duties. It led to Adrian's private office. Lila carried a stack of folded linens as camouflage, but one sleeve of her uniform was slightly wrinkled, creased not from work, but from being gripped. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Lila's face. Not guilt. Awareness. "You missed a spot in the upstairs gallery," Catherine said evenly. Lila blinked once, recalibrating. "I'll correct it immediately." Her voice was steady. Impressive. Catherine offered a thin smile and continued walking. 3 nights later, confirmation nearly arrived by accident. Adrian's phone buzzed repeatedly while he showered. He had left it on the nightstand, a rare oversight. Catherine was not a woman who searched through devices impulsively. She did not need to. But when the screen lit up again, a preview flashed across it. "Elle, you shouldn't have touched me like that in front of her." A second message followed. "Elle, it's dangerous, but I liked it." The steam from the bathroom fogged the mirrors. Water continued to run. Catherine did not pick up the phone. She simply memorized the contact name. Just the letter L. When Adrian emerged, toweling his hair, she was seated in the armchair by the window, flipping through a financial journal. "Your phone kept buzzing," she said calmly. He paused for the briefest moment before crossing the room. "Probably work." He checked the screen quickly, too quickly. "Yes. Work." "Of course." Catherine nodded, as if satisfied. She did not confront him. She wanted more. The security system in the house had been Adrian's idea years ago, for protection. He had insisted when Whitmore Technologies first began attracting media attention. What Adrian forgot was that Catherine had insisted on administrative access. All of it. The following afternoon, while the children were at school and Adrian was downtown at the office, Catherine entered the security control room tucked discreetly behind the wine cellar. She sat before the monitor wall. Cameras in the kitchen, the hallways, the east wing, the terrace. She rewound footage from the previous week. There were long stretches of nothing. Then patterns emerged. Lila entering corridors unrelated to her duties. Adrian arriving minutes later. On Tuesday at 3:14 p.m., Adrian stepped into the East guest suite. At 3:16, Lila followed. They did not reappear for 4 to 7 minutes. Catherine leaned back in her chair. 4 to 7 minutes during business hours. She continued reviewing. Thursday evening. The library. Saturday afternoon. The garden pavilion, just outside camera range, but close enough to see the beginning of an embrace before they moved into shadow. And then she saw it. Monday night. The master bedroom door closing after Catherine had left for a charity board dinner. Adrian had claimed exhaustion and stayed home. At 8:42 p.m., Lila entered the hallway. At 8:44, she slipped inside. The door locked. Catherine did not fast forward. She watched the entire timeline. At 9:31 p.m., Lila exited. Her hair was no longer pinned. Her lips slightly swollen. She adjusted her uniform before walking calmly back to the staff quarters. Catherine's face remained expressionless. But something fundamental shifted. Not heartbreak. Not shock. A recalibration of power. The next morning at breakfast, Catherine wore white. Crisp. Immaculate. Untouchable. Adrian appeared distracted, glancing occasionally toward the kitchen entrance where Lila stood waiting for instruction. "Could you bring the children's bags to the car?" Adrian asked Lila casually. "That's not her responsibility," Catherine said gently without looking up. The table went quiet. Lila lowered her eyes. "It's no trouble." "I'm sure it isn't," Catherine replied. "But we value structure in this household." Adrian forced a smile. "It was just a suggestion." "Of course," Catherine said, meeting his gaze at last. Her eyes were calm. Too calm. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Adrian's face. That afternoon, Catherine made a call. Not to a lawyer. Not yet. To Martin Hale, senior board member and one of the earliest investors in Whitmore Technologies. "Lunch?" she asked pleasantly. There was a pause on the other end. "Everything all right? I'd simply like to discuss the company's trajectory." That was enough. Meanwhile, Lila grew bolder. Catherine noticed the subtle changes. Perfume slightly stronger. Lipstick reapplied mid-afternoon. Adrian finding reasons to stay home more frequently, claiming remote strategy meetings. One evening, as Catherine passed the sitting room, she heard Lila laughing, freely, intimately. It stopped abruptly when Catherine stepped inside. Adrian was seated on the sofa. Lila stood beside him with a dust cloth. "Too close. You seem comfortable," Catherine observed lightly. Adrian cleared his throat. "We were just discussing her schedule." "Of course you were." Lila's hands trembled just slightly this time. Fear? Or anticipation? Catherine couldn't tell yet. But she knew one thing with certainty. They believed she didn't know. And that belief was their greatest vulnerability. That night, alone in her study, Catherine opened her laptop and began compiling 2 folders. One labeled personal, the other corporate. Dates, times, financial records, security logs. Because Adrian had not only brought betrayal into her home, he had funded it. Lila's salary was far above standard rate. Paid through a subsidiary account Adrian managed directly. Poorly disguised. Careless. Reckless. Arrogant. Catherine closed the laptop slowly. Adrian thought he was indulging in a secret. Lila thought she was ascending. Neither of them understood the scale of the mistake they had made. They had turned Catherine Whitmore from wife into opponent. And Catherine never entered a conflict unprepared. Catherine Whitmore did not rush. Rushed decisions were emotional. Emotional decisions were expensive. Instead, she adjusted her schedule. She began arriving at Whitmore Technologies headquarters earlier than usual, before Adrian. The executive assistants were always startled to see her step off the private elevator at 7:15 a.m., composed and purposeful. "I'll need the last 6 quarters of performance reports," she told finance calmly. Segmented by division. And copies of any deferred initiatives. The request raised eyebrows. Adrian had discouraged deep dives recently, insisting the company was transitioning into a softer growth phase. Catherine did not believe in soft growth. She believed in data. By the end of the week, patterns emerged as clearly as they had on the security footage at home. Missed expansion windows. Delayed contracts. Unnecessary luxury expenditures categorized as client relations. And buried within operating expenses. A discrete but consistent allocation to a consulting firm Adrian had sole oversight of. Catherine recognized the shell structure immediately. He hadn't even tried very hard. Her first private lunch was with Martin Hale. They met at an understated restaurant near the financial district. No paparazzi, no spectacle. Martin studied her carefully over his glasses. You haven't asked for this kind of meeting in years. I haven't needed to, Catherine replied. He folded his hands. So why now? Catherine slid a leather folder across the table. Inside were projections, alternative ones. Expansion models Adrian had dismissed. Cost analyses revealing inefficient spending. Risk assessments highlighting exposure the board had not been fully briefed on. Martin's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Why haven't we seen these? Because they weren't presented. A silence stretched between them. Are you implying Adrian is mismanaging the company? I'm stating that the company is being neglected. Her voice did not waver. Martin leaned back slowly. This is serious. It is. He closed the folder. If what you're suggesting is true, you'll need more than one board member. I'm aware. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine worked methodically. Private coffee with Olivia Chen, head of international investments. A quiet strategy session with Harold Bennett, largest shareholder outside the founding family. With each conversation, she did not attack Adrian personally. She presented facts. Declining profit margins. Missed strategic acquisitions. Executive disengagement. And finally, leadership instability, she said softly during one meeting, is the one variable markets punish without mercy. Are you prepared to step in? Olivia asked bluntly. Catherine met her gaze. I never stepped out. Meanwhile, at home, the atmosphere thickened. Adrian sensed something shifting but couldn't define it. Catherine was attentive, composed, even warmer in some ways. She asked about his day with genuine curiosity. She complimented his tie choices. She initiated small conversations at dinner. The performance unsettled him. Lila noticed it too. One afternoon in the kitchen, while the other staff were dismissed early, Lila approached Catherine carefully. Mrs. Whitmore, have I done something to displease you? Catherine looked up from the counter where she was arranging fresh flowers. Why would you think that? You've been watching me. There it was. Not fear. Challenge. Catherine placed the scissors down gently. In this house, she said calmly, I watch everything. Lila swallowed, but her chin remained lifted. I've only ever been respectful. Respect, Catherine replied, stepping closer, is not a performance. It's a boundary. For a split second, something hardened in Lila's eyes. Ambition. Ah, so that was it. This wasn't infatuation. It was aspiration. That evening, Adrian received an email marked urgent, board review request. He frowned. What's this about? He muttered. Catherine, seated across the living room with a tablet in hand, didn't look up. Quarterly evaluations, she said lightly. Standard governance procedure. He studied her. Since when do you concern yourself with procedural timing? Since timing began affecting valuation. Their eyes locked. He searched her face for accusation. There was none, which made it worse. 2 days later, Catherine hosted a small dinner at the estate. Officially, it was a casual gathering, board members and their spouses. Informal. Elegant. Lila was instructed to assist personally. Adrian seemed pleased by the event, interpreting it as support. What he didn't notice was seating arrangement. Catherine placed Martin beside her. Olivia across from her. Harold at the opposite head, slightly angled toward her rather than Adrian. Conversations flowed effortlessly. Catherine guided them. She spoke of innovation pipelines, emerging markets, long-term stability. When Adrian attempted to interject with optimistic generalities, she gently redirected. Adrian has been extraordinarily busy, she said smoothly, which is why I've taken a deeper role in operational continuity. The phrase lingered in the air. Operational continuity. Stability in the face of distraction. Lila moved around the table, pouring wine. Adrian's hand brushed hers under the pretense of reaching for his glass. Catherine saw. Olivia saw too. Interesting. After dessert, Martin approached Catherine privately on the terrace. You have enough, he said quietly. Not yet. What are you waiting for? She glanced through the glass doors, where Adrian laughed too loudly at something Harold had said, Lila standing discreetly behind him. I'm waiting, Catherine replied, for him to underestimate me one final time. Later that night, in the master bedroom, Adrian confronted her. What are you doing? Reading, she answered without looking up from her book. Don't play games, Catherine. The board, these meetings, you're positioning yourself. She closed the book slowly. I built this company with you. I'm the CEO. And I am the majority shareholder. The words landed like a gavel. He hadn't thought about that in years. She continued softly. Titles can be reassigned, Adrian. Ownership cannot. His jaw tightened. Are you threatening me? No. She stood, walking past him toward the window. I'm reminding you. Of what? She did not specify. She didn't need to. Down the hall, in the dimly lit staff quarters, Lila stared at her phone. A message from Adrian blinked on the screen. She suspects something. Lila typed back. Then choose. The message hung there between them. Choose. Adrian believed he was controlling two worlds. What he didn't realize was that both were closing in on him. And Catherine. Catherine was no longer reacting. She was advancing. The boardroom on the 42nd floor had always belonged to Adrian. His portrait hung at the far end, a glossy photograph taken the year Whitmore Technologies went public. Confident smile. Tailored navy suit. The caption beneath it read, Visionary Leadership for a New Era. That morning, the portrait was still there. But the atmosphere had changed. Adrian stepped out of the private elevator at 9 a.m. sharp, irritation already simmering beneath his polished exterior. The urgent full board assembly had disrupted his carefully arranged day. He disliked surprises, unless he was the one orchestrating them. The glass doors to the boardroom were already closed. Inside, every seat was occupied. Martin Hale, Olivia Chen, Harold Bennett. 3 independent directors dialed in via secure video. And at the head of the table, Catherine. She wore charcoal gray. Severe. Impeccable. No jewelry beyond her wedding band and a slim watch. Adrian paused just inside the doorway. What's going on? No one answered immediately. The silence was deliberate. Catherine gestured toward the empty chair halfway down the table, not at the head. Please, she said calmly. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Why aren't you sitting beside me? I am, she replied. On the appropriate side. The words were measured. Adrian Saturday. Martin cleared his throat. This session has been called under Section 8.3 of Corporate Governance Guidelines, Executive Performance Review and Emergency Leadership Assessment. Adrian laughed once, sharply. Emergency. Olivia slid a folder across the table toward him. Review the contents. He opened it carelessly at first. Then more slowly. Quarterly earnings reports annotated in red. Missed merger opportunities. Internal emails showing postponed decisions. Expense breakdowns tied to discretionary accounts. His jaw tightened. This is selective framing. Is it? Harold asked quietly. Another document slid forward. Transaction logs from a subsidiary entity, one Adrian had created 18 months earlier. Payments categorized as consulting fees. But the registered employee under payroll? Lila Moreau. Adrian's breath caught almost imperceptibly. Explain, Martin said. Adrian's eyes flashed toward Catherine. You went through my accounts. I audited company expenditure, she corrected evenly. This is a personal matter. Olivia's voice was cool. Not when company funds are involved. He straightened in his chair. You're suggesting I misuse corporate assets over what? A salary line. Catherine finally spoke. It isn't about the amount. Her gaze locked onto his. It's about judgment. Silence pressed against the walls. Martin folded his hands. Over the past year, revenue growth has slowed to its lowest margins since pre-IPO. Strategic initiatives have stalled. Risk exposure has increased. And now we're presented with evidence of compromised discretion. Adrian's composure began to fracture. This is orchestrated, he snapped. You've been meeting behind my back. Yes, Catherine said simply. The room stilled. You had no authority to. I hold 38% controlling interest, she interrupted calmly. Combined with proxy alignment from Mr. Hale and Ms. Chen. Adrian turned sharply toward them. Olivia did not look away. You left a vacuum, she said. She filled it. His gaze returned to Catherine, disbelief morphing into something darker. You planned this. No, she replied. You created it. Martin inhaled slowly. A vote has been proposed. Adrian's pulse pounded visibly at his temple. On what grounds? Removal of Adrian Whitmore as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately, citing breach of fiduciary responsibility and leadership instability. The words landed like falling steel. Adrian stood abruptly. This is absurd. I built this company. Catherine rose as well, but her movements were controlled, deliberate. We built it, she corrected softly. Harold looked at Adrian with something close to regret. Markets require confidence. And you've become a liability, Olivia added. Adrian's voice sharpened. You'd replace me with who? A committee. Catherine stepped fully into the head position of the table. With me. The air seemed to shift. Not dramatically, but decisively. Martin began the roll call. Each vote echoed with brutal clarity. Approve. 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 Even the remote directors cast their decisions without hesitation. Unanimous. The final word hung in the air like a sealed verdict. Adrian stared at Catherine. You would humiliate me like this. Her expression did not change. This isn't humiliation, she said quietly. This is consequence. Security personnel, discreet, corporate, appeared just outside the glass doors. Not aggressive. Merely procedural. Adrian noticed. His face flushed. You think this is victory, he hissed under his breath. You think this makes you powerful. Catherine leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. No, Adrian. I was already powerful. She straightened. As of this moment, I assume the role of Chief Executive Officer. Transition statements will be released within the hour. Mr. Whitmore will retain minority shares subject to review. The title shifted like gravity changing direction. CEO. Catherine Whitmore. Adrian looked around the room one last time, searching for hesitation. Sympathy. Doubt. He found none. Only resolve. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. This isn't over. Catherine met his gaze steadily. It is. He walked out without another word. The portrait at the far wall seemed almost mocking now. Martin exhaled deeply once the doors closed. Well, he said quietly. That was inevitable. Catherine remained standing at the head of the table. Draft the public statement carefully, she instructed. Emphasize continuity, stability, strategic recalibration. Olivia allowed herself a faint smile. You've been ready for this. For years, Catherine replied. She glanced toward the skyline beyond the windows. The city stretched endlessly, steel and glass and ambition. Whitmore Technologies would not fall. Not because of pride. Not because of indulgence. And certainly not because of a man who mistook recklessness for power. As the meeting adjourned, Catherine lingered alone in the boardroom for a moment. She reached for the remote on the wall. With a single press, Adrian's portrait screen went dark. Not destroyed. Just removed. Then she walked out, no hesitation, no backward glance. Into the role that had always been hers. Adrian did not come home immediately. 4 hours after the boardroom vote, he remained in his downtown office, though it was no longer his. He sat behind the desk out of habit, staring at a skyline that suddenly felt unfamiliar. His phone buzzed relentlessly. News alerts. Investor inquiries. A single message from Lila. What happened? Call me. He didn't answer. By the time his car turned into the long driveway of the Whitmore estate, dusk had settled. The house glowed softly from within, serene and untouched by the corporate earthquake that had just shaken his world. The sight infuriated him. He stepped inside without greeting the staff. Catherine was in the main sitting room, seated upright in a high-backed chair near the fireplace. A folder rested neatly on the table beside her. She was not working. She was waiting. You planned this, Adrian said immediately, his voice raw. Yes, she replied. No denial. No theatrics. The simplicity of it destabilized him more than an argument would have. You blindsided me in front of my own board. Our board. They voted because you manipulated them. They voted because you gave them reason. His hands clenched. This is about her. Catherine tilted her head slightly. Is it? Before he could respond, soft footsteps approached. Lila appeared at the threshold of the room. She had changed out of her uniform. That, more than anything, struck Adrian. She wore a fitted cream dress, elegant, understated. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked less like hired help and more like someone claiming space. She stopped a few steps inside, gaze flickering between them. Adrian, she asked quietly. The sound of his first name in her mouth felt different now, less intoxicating, more exposed. Catherine rose slowly from her chair. You may as well stay, she said to Lila. There's no need for further pretense. Lila's posture stiffened, but she did not retreat. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. This doesn't concern you. It concerns her entirely, Catherine corrected. The air thickened. I know, Catherine continued, her voice steady. About the East Wing. The library. The master bedroom. Adrian's face drained of color. Lila's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. You've been spying, he demanded. In my own home. Catherine's eyebrow lifted slightly. I've been aware. She turned her attention fully to Lila. You're ambitious, Catherine said, studying her. That much is clear. Lila's chin lifted defensively. I didn't force him. No, Catherine agreed. You didn't have to. Adrian stepped forward. Stop talking about her like she's some calculated scheme. I care about her. Lila glanced at him, something like uncertainty flashing across her expression. Catherine noticed. Kay. Catherine repeated softly. Is that what you call diverting company funds to finance a fantasy? Lila's head snapped toward Adrian. Funds? She asked quietly. He hesitated. A fatal pause. Catherine didn't miss it. Yes, she continued evenly. Your salary wasn't generosity. It was corporate expense. Lila stared at him now, the first fracture appearing in her composure. You told me you were paying out of your own account. Adrian's jaw tightened. It's the same difference. No, Catherine said calmly. It isn't. Silence descended, heavy and irreversible. The illusion began to peel away. Lila took a slow step back, reassessing everything she thought she understood. You said you were leaving her, she said to Adrian, her voice thinning. You said this was temporary. Adrian looked between them, cornered. I was going to. When? Catherine asked quietly. He had no answer. The children's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs, unaware of the fracture splitting their home. Catherine walked toward the center of the room, commanding the space without raising her voice. This house, she said, is in my name. Adrian blinked. What? The trust structure was established before we went public. Asset protection strategy. You signed it without reading the fine print. His expression shifted from anger to dawning horror. You can't remove me from my own home. I already have. She picked up the folder from the table and handed it to him. Inside were legal documents, temporary separation filings, revocation of residential access, notice of executive termination acknowledgement. You prepared divorce papers, he whispered. I prepared options. Lila's confidence visibly faltered. You told me she depended on you, she said to Adrian. That she'd never survive without you. Catherine almost smiled. That narrative must have been comforting. Adrian's voice cracked. This is vindictive. No, Catherine replied softly. This is structured. She turned to Lila again. You mistook proximity for position, she said. You thought sharing his bed meant sharing his power. Lila's eyes burned now, not with arrogance, but humiliation. I loved him, she said quietly. Catherine regarded her without cruelty. No, she said gently. You loved what he represented. And Adrian. Adrian loved being represented. The truth settled like ash. Catherine moved toward the staircase. By morning, she said without turning back, your belongings will be packed. Both of you. Adrian stared after her. You can't take my children from me. She paused halfway up the stairs. I'm not taking them from you, she replied calmly. I'm protecting them from instability. He sank into the nearest chair, the weight of his losses pressing down all at once. His title, his reputation, his control, and now, his illusion. Lila stood frozen near the doorway, the grandeur of the estate no longer feeling like opportunity but exposure. For the first time since she arrived, she looked small. Catherine reached the top of the staircase and looked down at them one final time. You both believed I wouldn't see, she said quietly. Her gaze moved from Adrian to Lila. You both believed I wouldn't act. The house felt different now, not fractured, but reclaimed. This is the last night either of you will underestimate me. She turned and disappeared down the hall. Below, silence lingered between the two who had once believed themselves clever. Outside, the estate remained perfectly still. Inside, power had shifted permanently, and neither of them had realized. They were never playing the same game. 6 months changed everything. Whitmore Technologies did not collapse without Adrian. It accelerated. Under Catherine's leadership, the company regained its sharp edge. Stalled expansion plans moved forward with precision. A renewable energy acquisition, one Adrian had dismissed as premature, became the company's most profitable division within a single quarter. Investors responded immediately. Stock prices climbed. Media narratives shifted. Headlines that once celebrated Adrian's charisma now praised Catherine's strategic brilliance. The quiet architect behind Whitmore's rise steps forward. Catherine Whitmore, precision over performance. She never commented publicly on Adrian's removal beyond a single statement. Leadership is stewardship. Whitmore Technologies will always prioritize stability, integrity, and long-term vision. No bitterness. No scandal. Which made the contrast sharper. Adrian, on the other hand, discovered how quickly influence evaporates. The friends who once flooded his phone with invitations now responded days later, if at all. The advisory roles he expected to secure never materialized. Investors were wary. His reputation carried a subtle stain that no official press release had to spell out. Instability. Poor judgment. Ethical concerns. Corporate circles were small. Whispers traveled faster than facts. Lila left within weeks of his removal. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just quietly. She had not signed up to rebuild a fallen empire. The luxury, the power, the access, that had been the attraction. Without them, Adrian was simply a man with excuses. He tried to persuade her to stay. You said you loved me. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. I loved who you were when you were powerful. The honesty stung more than betrayal. And so she walked away. For the first time in his life, Adrian stood alone in a space that felt smaller than it should have. At the estate, life reorganized itself with remarkable resilience. The children adjusted more easily than expected. Stability had returned, not the tense quiet of concealed betrayal, but a grounded, predictable rhythm. Catherine made sure of it. Breakfasts were unhurried. School events never missed. Weekend evenings were reserved for family dinners. No phones, no business interruptions. The house felt lighter. One evening, as Catherine reviewed quarterly projections in her study, her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore is here. He's requesting a meeting." She paused. There had been custody exchanges. Brief, civil, controlled. But this was different. "Send him in." Adrian entered slowly. He looked older, not physically aged, but diminished. The sharp certainty that once defined his posture had softened into something uncertain. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. Catherine gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. "This is about the children?" she asked. "No." He hesitated. "It's about us." The word felt misplaced. "There is no us, Adrian." He swallowed. "You didn't have to take everything." Her gaze remained steady. "I didn't. You took the company. You forfeited it. You turned the board against me. I presented them with facts." His voice cracked slightly. "You dismantled my life." Catherine closed the folder in front of her. "No," she said quietly. "I stopped protecting it." The truth hung between them. For years, she had corrected his oversights, smoothed over his impulsive decisions, strengthened strategies he weakened, shielded him from consequences he barely noticed. "You were never alone in your success," she continued. "You just believed you were." He looked down at his hands. "I made a mistake." "Yes." Silence filled the room, but it was not cruel. It was honest. "I thought you'd forgive me," he admitted. Catherine considered him carefully before responding. "I might have forgiven betrayal," she said. "What I could not forgive was disrespect." He looked up. "You brought deception into our home. You gambled with the company we built. And you underestimated me in both places." Her voice never rose, which made every word land with surgical precision. "You didn't lose everything because of me," she continued. "You lost everything because you believed I would never act." He exhaled slowly, the weight of recognition settling in. There was no dramatic apology, no grand gesture, because both of them understood something fundamental now. This was not a marriage broken in anger. It was a partnership dissolved by imbalance. Adrian stood after a long moment. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Taking control." Catherine's expression softened, not with affection, but with clarity. "I don't regret reclaiming what was already mine." He nodded once, and for the first time, there was no defiance in him, just acceptance. He left without another word. Later that night, Catherine stepped onto the terrace overlooking the city. The skyline glittered beneath her, alive, ambitious, restless. Her phone buzzed with a market update. Whitmore stock had closed at its highest valuation in company history. She allowed herself a small, private smile. Not because Adrian had fallen, but because she had risen without apology. Inside, her children's laughter echoed faintly from the living room. That was the true measure of victory. Not revenge. Not humiliation. Restoration. Catherine Whitmore had not destroyed her husband. She had simply removed the illusion that he was indispensable. And in doing so, she had taught a lesson neither he nor Lila would ever forget. Power is not given. It is recognized. And when underestimated, it does not beg to be seen. It reveals itself. Finally, we have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more intriguing stories.